Hey guys, what is up? This is Matthew Davis, me once again. Welcome back to another video game review. This time it is going to be on Silent Hill 2. That's right, the remake to one of the all-time greatest horror video games. Because Resident Evil has been very popular with their remakes, Konami decided to bring Silent Hill back from the dead and bringing it back with this fresh new iteration of the 2001 classic. And the story remains the same as you play as James Sutherland, who is on a journey throughout the town of Silent Hill to find his late wife, who died 3 years ago, but he believes she just might still be alive. But of course, because it's a remake, there is definitely bound to be changes. But when this game was announced, people were psyched. Like, people were really excited until more information about the game came out, and because of it, people thought that this game was just going to be nothing but a complete disaster because Silent Hill hasn't returned for another game since I don't know when, because after Silent Hill 4, there have just been a bunch of these other spin-offs that just did not live up to the hype of the previous games that came before it. Especially not since, Silent Hill 2, because that is considered to be the best in the series. The first one will always be a classic, but there was just something about Silent Hill 2 that just perfected the horror video game genre, as it had a terrific story, good characters, terrifying bosses, and enemies like Pyramid Head is still one of the creepiest things to ever be seen in video game form. So, yeah, but, I actually did have hope for the game because when it comes to horror video game remakes, there have just been so many good ones that managed to capture the spirit. Like 75% of the Resident Evil remakes, the other 25 was just good, but couldn't live up to the original of, their original counterparts of that. And of course, there was the Dead Space remake, which shame on all of you guys for not picking up, because despite that game getting a great amount of praise from critics and gamers, people just, slept on that game. And because of that, we're never going to see another iteration of Dead Space ever. Like, they gave that franchise another chance, and despite the fact that that game was so good, people just ignored it. So, yeah, but, with games like Silent Hill 2, this game proves that you shouldn't always be judgmental of upcoming video games. Because, of course, there have been tons of video games, to come out in recent memory that might end up just being complete suckfests. And yeah, they do tend to be suckfests because they provided nothing but live service elements and lacking in stories. But I feel like with Silent Hill 2, especially since it's a remake, really captures the spirit of that original game. The game still looks absolutely haunting, and the fact that it's in a third-person perspective, as the original game, of course, was in like a, I don't know how to put it, kind of like a semi-top-down / third-person perspective. And of course, it was a little bit more harder to control, but of course the controls have been much more improved here because it's in the familiar over-the-shoulder view like you would see in something like Resident Evil or something like that. And it still has its slow pacing, and it still has its great amount of puzzles that you're going to have to solve in order to continue on with the game. And the puzzles, yeah, they're definitely quite a pain, unlike the puzzles in Resident Evil, as they're a little bit more, like, you still have to backtrack once in a while when it came to those puzzles, but I feel like when it comes to the remakes to those games, I feel like those games tend to manage to do it right, as while you do have a map in the game, it can often be a pain about where exactly you're going from one area to another. Sure, there are these little indications of specific areas you need to go to, but I don't know, when it came to the puzzles, I feel like most of the time you're just going to have to look up a walkthrough because sometimes it doesn't always indicate what exactly you're supposed to get. But of course, you're going to be exploring big areas from apartments to hospitals to, of course, the city of Silent Hill itself in the beginning of the game. And there's also a good amount of cinematic cutscenes because while the cutscenes in the original were fine at the time, definitely didn't feel as cinematic, and the voice acting definitely didn't work as well. But because this is modern time and the cutscenes were able to be more cinematic, I feel like really managed to bring more of its story in because the story is still there and it's still great. And the fact that there was a good amount of cutscenes this time with more cinematic appeal to them, I feel like it brings a lot more to the story, and it made me a lot more invested. Like, I definitely was when the story was told in the original. But right here, because the cutscenes were more fluent this time around, I feel like there was a lot more to the storyline. And yes, there are multiple endings, just like there was in the original, with, I believe, 2 new ones. Like, there are a lot of the same ones, and as far as I know, there's still that weird secret dog ending. But yeah, the game, just like the original, still provides a lot of replayability. Now, of course, the biggest thing to change in this game is the combat. And the combat is fine. Like, combat isn't really known to be a big part in the Silent Hill franchise. I mean, it's there because it gives you a chance to survive. But when it comes to the Silent Hill games, I have a good amount of ammo left, and I feel like I don't always see myself using it a lot of the time until it gets to the later act, because I see myself using melee weapons a lot. But even when it comes to the melee weapons, the melee combat, it can be kind of repetitive. But, despite that, it doesn't hide the fact that the game still can be quite intense. But when it comes to the enemies, they can be a little bit repetitive because they're mostly the same ones. Like, there's this one that looks like it has 2 parts of legs together that just walk around trying to attack you, and then there's the one creature with a knife, and then there's those crawly ones, and then there's these ones that are hanging like on those rail things that are trying to, spew its tentacles out at you. And yeah, it can get a little bit repetitive, but other than that, I did find that the combat was pretty manageable. Though sometimes when it comes to enemies, when enemies show up at you, there's like the static sound effect, which you can turn off. It does allow you to turn off specific features, but when it comes to that static effect, a lot of the time I don't see an enemy in front of me and it just hits me behind. But yeah, it just kind of got annoying. So yeah, the combat might not be perfect. But I do feel like it's definitely more manageable because it is a little bit hard to get used to because the original Silent Hill games definitely were a bit more tanky when it came to its controls. And I don't think all the puzzles are bad. Like, they're definitely frustrating to get past. Like, a lot of the time it feels like you're kind of doing schoolwork because it brings in a lot of this history stuff at you. But yeah, despite the fact that, the puzzles can be irritating and the combat isn't perfect, as long as the game has that same atmosphere and psychological depth that the original game has, that's all that really matters to me. And hey, the game is playable. And hey, I think there are often times where the combat can be good, especially when it comes to the bosses. I think the bosses are a lot more improved here too. Like Pyramid Head, I think is just as terrifying as ever. Like, especially when it comes to later down the line where you have to fight him where, he's just, where you have to fight 2 Pyramid Heads. Like, the bosses are still there, and I feel like they're a lot better this time around. Well, Silent Hill will never perfect its combat system, at least as of right now, unless, they do decide to continue on, and if this game does well enough to continue on with bringing Silent Hill back, and I hope it does, because this is a great return to form. Despite it being a remake, I still think it does a lot right. Like, I definitely do consider it to be up there with the Dead Space remake and the Resident Evil remakes, because when it comes to horror games, I do anticipate them, and most of the time they do work. Though there was a remake to Alone in the Dark, which, yeah, wasn't that good. I mean, it was definitely better than the 2008 reboot, but that game, I feel like it's just going to be forgotten years in the future. But how's the actual setting of the game? Well, the game looks great. I mean, it does have the 30 FPS to 60 FPS gameplay thing that you can do, though the cutscenes are only at 30 FPS, which is kind of disappointing, and it doesn't always run well, but hey, the game still manages to get a lot right when it comes to having the same story, and the ending is still just as great, and there are tons of different ones, so people will definitely choose between their favorite ending. So yeah, well, the puzzles can be a bit frustrating, and just due to the fact that you're going to be backtracking a lot. I do think the areas, when it comes to the way they play out, I do feel like they still manage to have that creepy atmosphere. Like, you'll have no idea where specific enemies are going to be coming from, and it's not always just about jump scare from jump scare to jump scare to jump scare. This is a remake that really manages to pay tribute to its source material and respecting it, while also having its fantastic story, because in terms of horror games, Silent Hill 2 might just have the best one. Like, they don't do anything to change it or just completely butcher it. The characters remain the same. Their looks should look exactly like how they would in the original game. The game just has so much right going for it, and there are a lot of improvements here, but there are also some times where it doesn't do as much justice as its original counterpart, because while the combat in the original game certainly wasn't perfect, it was a lot more easier to get around. It didn't feel as annoying, but hey, it's something that we kind of have to get used to. And hey, the game is always super investing when it comes to its storyline for me to want to keep going. And despite the fact that I did get stuck a lot when it came to these puzzles. Like, I just had to go back from one area because sometimes there are doors that you can't open and there are areas you can, but hey, despite the annoyances, I still managed to get by, and I had myself a really great time with it. And in the end, guys, Silent Hill 2 Remake, yeah, it could have been a disaster, but I think it's far from it. It still manages to keep that dark atmosphere while also keeping its story and its characters in depth, and doesn't do anything to ruin any aspect of it whatsoever. And it just manages to have that same psychological feel that the original had. Its combat might not be perfect, but it's definitely manageable. Like, it does give you another weapon, as you only had your handgun and shotgun in the original. So, yeah, there are definitely more options of going by enemies. And hell, you could just pass by enemies, despite the fact that they may stalk you a lot of the time. But, hey, they were a lot manageable in the original game, but right here, they can be a bit irritating. But hey, it's good to have them there just to make it feel like a game sometimes, even if it is a bit irritating. But hey, there's always a challenge when it comes to its puzzles. Like, you can always switch out the modes for the combat and the challenge. There are actually quite a bit of customizations to, fix the game up for you how you want to play it. So yeah, I appreciate it for that. I do think $70 is a little bit much because you do just have the game itself. You don't have any other modes or stuff like that, but hey, it has tons of replayability, and there's a new game plus option. So, yeah, I still think the game is worth replaying. Maybe continue on playing it even after you finish it, because the game definitely has stuff to offer, and I feel like it does a great job paying tribute to that original game and just being a great game overall. It's definitely has a little bit more meat on its bones than the other game has. It definitely, it's been years since I played the original game, so I'm not going to fully remember what was in that original game and what they added here that's different, but I guess I can always look it up. But either way, this is still a great remake, and I recommend giving it a chance if you still have your doubts. You might actually be surprised with this one. The fact that critics and gamers are actually agreeing that this is actually really solid is usually a rare sight. And Silent Hill just might be back if people actually support this, and I recommend supporting it. I recommend playing the game, because if Konami decides to bring Silent Hill back in this level, then Silent Hill just might be back, because there was a time when Resident Evil was almost dead because of the amount of games that came after, but ever since Resident Evil 7, we had tons of great games after that, and we even got the great remakes to come after that. So yeah, Silent Hill just might be back. Just support the game. It's worth it. Konami has been on a losing streak recently, and I feel like this is officially a win. Just support it, and maybe Konami might be doing something right for a change, because I feel like they did do something right with this game. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Ward out.